All right. As we're taking out our grammar, for the benefit of the people watching this on tape, for us live, it was Easter yesterday.
2008.
Yeah, 2008. 2006. And as you know, I'm preaching through the Old Testament. So if you were gonna stick with the Old Testament, and you're gonna preach on Easter, and you wanted to have a resurrection theme for obvious reasons, where would you preach? Noah. Noah?
Noah, yeah. Jonah?
Jonah?
A little bit, yeah. The 3 days. You know how you'll know 3 days later.
Okay, that's good. Jonah in the whale, right? All right, I like that.
Maybe Exodus. Passover, the death, and the resurrection.
Passover, death, but okay.
Well, Isaiah. Psalm 22. I would do maybe Psalm 22.
Maybe Psalm 22
Or 16.
Isaiah? What do you mean Isaiah?
Some of the prophecy.
Yeah. Well, actually, I spoke from Isaiah 53. Kind of jumped ahead. Those are good. Those are good ideas, though. Resurrection passages in the Old Testament. So I spoke from Isaiah 53. It was kind of interesting having, as I just mentioned, a Jewish person in church. In my preaching, I would have pronounced the name of God, Yahweh, but didn't because the Jewish person was there for fear of offending him. Now, he was in my house, so to speak, so I could have. But why be unnecessarily offensive on I think his first time maybe ever to our church. First time I've ever seen him in church. So it was really quite interesting. I wish I'd been able to speak to him afterwards, but I didn't get to speak to him.
How do you know he was Jewish?
Well, because I know his wife and her parents, and I know that she's married to a Jewish man.
And you knew he was coming to church?
I didn't know, but I shook hands with him, and they were sitting together, and I assumed it was her husband, and it turned out to be. And since I know her husband is Jewish, just like that, I put that together.
And you adjusted your sermon just like that?
Well, on the fly a little bit.
Did you change your transcript later?
No, I wouldn't have had that in the transcript anyway. Yeah. So anyway, let's take a look at Isaiah 53 just for a moment. There's some fun stuff in Isaiah 53. Page 797. That's kind of odd because the book of Ruth for us now is way after the book of Isaiah in the Hebrew Bible, right? Ruth is in the last section of the Bible. Isaiah is in the second section of the 3 sections of Hebrew Bible.
What page did you say?
I said 759.
Oh,
What did I say?
I heard 797. That's with me in Jeremiah 8.
Oh. Wow, that's not even dyslexic.
797.
Yeah. 759.
That looks better.
Yeah, Isaiah 53. Probably familiar with Isaiah 53.
53:6 comes to mind. The lamb.
Oh, yeah. Isaiah 53:6. Maybe we should look at
the
Isaiah.
sinners are trying to excuse you.
Well, all right, let's take a look at the first verse of Isaiah 53. Me is who, so who, mean. Now, let me give you a hint. That was a vocabulary word we just had. Huh? Yeah.
Trustworthy and reliable?
Well, no, actually. That's not what that said.
Trustworthy and reliable?
Yeah, it is the vocabulary word we just had, the very first one, right? How are we going to parse it? What do you see there that is in addition to the vocabulary form?
The hay and the yoke.
Okay, there's a hay and there's a Hirik Yod. Haven't had this yet, but what's that an indicator of?
Yeah.
Huh? Hifil. That's right. So here we have the Hifil, and you can see it. You can see the term Hifil in the spelling of this word, can't you? In other words, it begins with an H, and there's a Hirik Yod in the middle of it. So this is a Hifil perfect. Now the subject here is actually first, which is not typical in the Hebrew sentence, right? But the subject is who, so this is a question. And now the next word, what do you see in the next word?
Lamed.
Yeah, there's a lamed. Now this actually turns out to be a noun, but it looks like a verb, you know.
It's like Shema.
It looks like Shema. That's right. So here it means message or report. And then it's got a one CP suffix on it. Do you see that? And a lamed stuck to the beginning of it. So the lamed is kind of is interacting with the word to believe. In Greek, words like believe take objects in a different case than the accusative, right? Well, you kind of have that going on here. So, who believed our message? All right. Now we come to the arm. Whose ro'ah, that is arm. Now you know zarah. What does that mean?
Strong. Seed.
Related to seed and related to sowing. So it's interesting that the word for arm, or at least this word for arm, seems to be related to the word for sowing. But you might be able to read some more of that.
All?
On the account of who?
Close.
Not who?
Upon whom?
On.
Now, maybe you remember this, the last word of the verse from the book of Ruth.
Is that a God?
It is galak. Notice what's happened. The hay turned to what?
Top.
Which we're used to that with third position hay verbs. We're used to in the perfect the hay becoming a tav. Okay. What else do you see happening there?
Noon.
Pardon?
Noon.
There's a noon. Why is there a noon there?
Well, there's no dogish, which is, I guess, what I would look like. That's right. It's in.
It's a nifal. That's right. It's a nifal, and you can see the vowel points are very consistent with that. You have the hirik, ni, right? The shiva under the first root letter, a vowel under the second root letter, just like you do in the term nifal, right? So that means it's passive. What does galah mean?
Reveal. Uncover. Disclose.
All right. So the arm of the Lord upon whom has been revealed. Right. So we have a nifal, perfect, 3FS. Why? Because the word arm is the subject, and that's going to be a feminine noun, undoubtedly. Right. So, who has believed our report, and the arm of Yahweh, upon whom has it been revealed? Interesting way to start this. We've talked about Hebrew poetic parallels before. Think about the parallels of those two. First of all, what kind of relationship do you think those two have in terms of their conceptual parallelism? Is it saying something, the opposite? Is it saying something completely different? Is it saying something similar or the same? or what's happening? All right, it's saying something similar, isn't it? But there are significant differences. Who believed our message? To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed, uncovered? All right, what would you learn from looking at that juxtaposition?
Concept of message and revealing.
All right, so the concept of message and revealing. So Isaiah then would see his message as being a revelation of God. Isaiah would see the prophetic message as being a revelation of God. That's very good. What else?
Understanding that maybe the Hebrew word behind believe, trustworthy, reliable, and the arm of the Lord.
Now you're making parallel believe and arm of the Lord and message and reveal. Does everybody agree with that?
I would look at 1 Timothy chapter 4 where it talks about the arm of the Lord being the salvation of our God and the believing of the message being parallel with the salvation that comes in the knowledge of the Lord.
Right, and that's part of the poetry that runs through it. But let's just deal with this as it stands here. You do have believing first and arm first. But what's happening here, do you think? Because I don't think believing and arm go together. I think believing and been revealed go together, and message and arm go together. So what's happening here? Why do we have this order? No. Chiastic structure, that's right. So we have a chiastic structure here. So we can compare believe and has been uncovered or revealed. So belief depends on the revelation of God, right? And we can read together the message or the report and the arm of the Lord. What significance do you think that has? One has to do with speaking, right? And here, the hearing part is emphasized by this word, right? And one has to do with doing. I mean, don't you think that's what the arm of the Lord? It's talking about the actions of God, right? So, in one, you're thinking about the speaking of God, and in the other, you're thinking about the action of God. You see how he's juxtaposed those two? What does that tell you? What can we say about that?
They're both means by which he's revealed.
Okay. God reveals himself through language. God also reveals himself through action, doesn't he? That's important.
Are those from Sarah, the seed and offspring? That's the word arm is from?
Well, it's related to the word for sowing, which is related to the word for seed, for obvious reasons.
Well, I'm wondering if that has something to do with it, if it's more of a...
That's a really, really good question. And it may be that if you did some research and found out that there's, 2 or 3 different words for arm, especially if this is a lesser used word for arm, then you may find some significance in that. But I am assuming off the bat that he's just using the word for arm. And there really isn't any significance in the sowing kind of thing. Maybe that's not right, but there'd have to be a reason to go in that direction. You understand what I mean? Because he just wants to say the arm. I think it has to do more with God's activity, right? If he said the right arm of God, that might be an allusion to power. But it could be if this is a one option for a word for arm, it could mean the sowing of revelation. You could kind of take it that way. But I'd be careful with that. I'd want a reason for going in that direction other than just the fact that that's the etymology of the word. Right? But it's interesting, the juxtaposition, I think, with God's revelation in language, God's revelation in action, because God uses both to reveal himself, doesn't he? But I think you can also say that those two things are consistent with one another. God's words will be consistent with his actions, and God's actions will be consistent with his words. God talks about redemption, but God's actions back up his words. And in this poetry of Isaiah 53, we see the action that he takes as Jesus clearly is being pictured here and his crucifixion.
That's for general and special revelation. They know that the arm would be general revelation and the report would be special revelation. The idea that Jesus is, God is revealed and all that is seen, and God is revealed all that is.
Yeah, that's part of it. I don't know if I want to be quite that strict because
So I'm pretty much taking the origin approach to this.
Yeah, and there is. I mean, if you look at Romans, you do have the general revelations, and I think that's there. But I'm not sure that every action of God, and that's really a question I never thought about. I'm not sure that every action of God would qualify as general revelation as opposed to special revelation. There are probably actions of God that would qualify as special revelation, miracles. That's a category of special revelation. And the cross itself, would that be special revelation? Even though language isn't used at that point. But that's a great question. How would you categorize that?
Yeah.
All right, there's another verse, verse 5, that you probably are familiar with. Who is he? All right. And he, macholal. Any idea what that means? Probably not. Let me have you look that up just so you can get a picture of it here. If you read the stuff in the chapters for today, he brings up
I guess Hallel for worship.
Well, Hallel is for praise, but this is Halal, which is different. You see what I mean? It's got a hey instead of a hey.
I'm sorry. As it. Professor.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And so there's I don't doubt it. I'm sure there's a reference to this verse in BDB. What does Einspar tell us about it?
B-O-R-E.
B-O-R-E, to bore a hole, sort of a thing. I'm seeing it on page 106 of Holiday, the very top. So that it's the number 2, Halal. And so what is it? It is a polal. Never heard of a polal before, have you? But if you notice in our chapters, we'll see that there are all kinds of other secondary Hebrew stems, that we're learning the main ones here, but you can get all these. There's a polel. See the polel above that, a polal. The polal is going to be passive, right? And it's participle. See our form right there in Isaiah 53. In fact, that's the only time you see the polal of that word used in the Old Testament, because I see that dagger right there, right? Isaiah 53:6. It's a participle. Now, what's marking it out as a participle? The meme on the front of it. We're going to begin to learn that tonight. That if it's not a cal participle, and if it's not a nifal participle, we're going to expect it to begin with meme. Okay? And so it's a participle, so it means wounded or pierced.
Pierce.
Yeah, pierced. Which is kind of amazing, isn't it? Because, clearly we're having an allusion to, this is a messianic chapter, isn't it? We're having an allusion to Christ on the cross, and it actually uses the word pierced. So I think that's really quite amazing. So verse 5, and he, to get into English, the participle, we would say, and he was pierced. Now, the next word begins with a mem, and you might guess a dogish in the next letter, and you might guess that that's the preposition min, stuck on the front of that word, and you would be right about that. So, in this case, the min, normally we would translate that from. In this case, it has kind of a causal meaning. Yeah, he was pierced because of.
EDB gave me a lot more information.
Pardon?
EDB gave me more information. It kind of has both words together.
That's great, and that illustrates why we want to have BDB.
Yeah.
Because BDB is giving you more information, and it's a better research tool. But because it gives you more information, it's harder to use just to flip through and to do translation. Mm-hmm. Right? So it was pretty easy for me to find it in Holiday. So if what you're trying to do is get through a passage and get it translated, then you'll pick up Holiday. If what you're trying to do is do a word study, then you'll pick up BDB. So kind of the difference between the two lexicon. All right? So he was pierced he was pierced because of our. Does Einspar give you any help with that one?
Oh, Einspar.
Okay, good. So, we know what this is going to say because we know the English, right? But it's good to see. He was pierced because of our transgressions, and you see the one CS suffix on it, right? And you see that it's he was pierced because of our transgressions, right? Now, Maduka. Now, we haven't had this stand, but we will. It's a pu'al. Now, and you can see that with the shurik there, right? Pu, not the shurik. The kibbutz. You can see pu'al. You can see that vowel sort of pattern right there. What's the vocabulary word? And then the pu'al is going to have a dogish in the middle root letter, and that's why that dogish is in the kaf right there, just like the pal that we're going to learn, right? So it's a pu'al. Why is the mem there? Participle. Just like I just said, mem at the beginning of a word is going to mark out a participle in some cases. It could be the preposition on a noun or something, right? But it's going to mark out a participial form, not cal, not nifal. In this case, pu'al. The ka means, again, do you have any help in Einspar there? So what do you see it meaning? Crush, that's right. So, again, this is a participle, and it's passive. Pu'al is passive, right? But we're not going to translate it as a participle. And he was crushed, and we have the same mem here because of and our what? He was pierced because of our transgressions. He was crushed because of our iniquities, sins. All right.
Did you, when you preached through this, did you talk about the difference between transgressions and iniquities?
No, I covered the whole chapter, and I was flying. But in the next line, I did talk about what we're going to see in the next line. The next line says, musar, chastisement, beating, right? The chastisement, shalomenu. You know that one. Peace. Shalom, peace. Now, what's shalomenu?
Our peace?
Our peace. Excellent.
Peace to you.
Well, how would you say peace to you in modern Hebrew?
Our peace.
Huh?
Our peace. Our peace.
So this very word?
Yeah, like that.
You'd say shalom.
Mhm.
You might say shalom aleichem.
Right, exactly.
Shalom aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem.
Notice, what's the next word? Shalomenu, not alechem, which means upon you. So what you're saying when you're saying shalom aleichem is peace upon you, peace be upon you, right? Here we don't have shalom exactly, we have shalomenu, and we don't have alechem, we have alive. What is alive? Yeah, upon him, that's right. So we have our peace upon him.
Our peace.
But don't forget the first word. The chastisement, now we got to put the in English, right? The chastisement of our peace was upon him. Now think about that picture for a moment. New American Standard you had there? New American Standard, I think, says well-being, right? Read that line in New American Standard. The chastisement of our well-being was upon him.
Yeah, the chastening for our well-being fell in the italics, fell upon him.
All right. Think about that a moment. Now, what is peace in the Hebrew mindset? You need to know that in our mindset, peace simply means the absence of conflict. But in the Hebrew mindset, it not only means the absence of conflict, but it means the presence of prosperity. So peace is not just an absence of negative, but it's also the presence of the positive. Right?
Whole, isn't it?
Wholeness, yeah, that's a good, exactly. So the chastisement of our wholeness was upon him. What do you think about that? That's a very interesting way. What he's getting at is that our punishment fell on him, right? That's what he's trying to say, but he's saying it in a very poetic way. The chastisement of our peace. How do you chastise peace? You know, it really isn't literally possible to chastise peace, is it? You have to chastise something physical. Yeah, and you're probably going to chastise something living. And in this context, you're going to chastise a person. So it's using language that really isn't literally possible to paint a picture, and that's part of what poetry does, doesn't it? So, what should happen to our peace? What should happen to our wholeness? Well, as sinners, we should be punished out of peace, right? We should be punished until we have no peace forever, right? Well, this says that the chastisement, the punishment of our peace was upon him. That's we're meditating on a little bit, isn't it? Right? So on some level, we got to keep our peace, and he took the punishment. And very literally, we don't face an ordeal like the cross. We remain in relative peace and wholeness while Jesus faces the cross.
Verse 12. Talks about how we haven't gone through what Christ has gone through.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So that's very interesting, but I think it gets even more interesting in the next part of this. All right. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and the bait is the preposition, and chavur, bachavur to. You have any idea what that is?
Here it says stripe.
Okay, stripe. So, we're looking at a noun, stripe. We have the bait on the front of it. So, by, and there is a definite article there. Can you see the definite article? Anybody see the definite article there in that word?
The dagish?
No? Well, there is the dagish.
Or the...
Now we see the conjunction, oo, and, right? And where's the definite article? Like, hey doesn't show up when you have a prepositional prefix. The patak. Okay? Because what would we have if there were no article under a prefixed preposition? Shiva. Right? We don't have a straw, we have the potluck, so there's a definite article there. So, and by the stripes, what?
We.
No, oh. We have a 3MS. We have a 3MS on the end of that word, don't we? Do you see it? So, and all of these English words come out as one Hebrew word. And by his stripes. Right? All those English words come out of that one Hebrew word. Now, nirpa. What does Rapha mean? To heal. Okay, to heal. What do we have here?
We were healed.
All right, it's pretty tempting to. It's pretty tempting to make this a cow imperfect. Right, one, first person, plural.
It's a nifal, or
It's not though. No. You see the noon there, and you're thinking first common plural, imperfect. It's not.
That's what.
No, we'll look it up. Okay, well let's look at the word. Let's look up Rapha. Part of the problem we have is what comes after Rapha. Lanu, what is that? To us or for us. So that's part of the problem we have with making that a first common plural. All right. Let us know if you find that.
951.
Not what?
951.
951 at EDB, 344 at Holiday. Rapha, right? Cow. Well, I'm going to look for a cow. Imperfect.
I see it stretched out.
350. How do you spell it? Let's see.
44.
So, if it were cal imperfect, it would be to heal. It would be active, and it would mean to heal.
To heal.
So, if it were that, we're going for a meaning like, we will heal for us. And that's not making much sense in the context, right? And I'm not seeing our form.
It's the first one under Nifal.
Nifal, the very first one under Nifal. All right. There it is. So what we have is a Nifal perfect 3MS. How would you translate a Nifal perfect 3MS?
Healed. We are healed.
Well, you could say he was healed, or he is healed. I mean, the English tense of it could vary, right?
Healing has come to us.
Well, where did you get that? How do you make that work in the grammar?
Well, you got your the nipple.
He was healed.
Become healed, restored.
Is healing for us?
Well, you could translate it, and by his stripes he was healed for us. But that doesn't make a lot of sense, because how is someone healed by their stripes? So that doesn't make logical sense to me.
Is it of?
Well, if 3MS could be in English a neuter concept, right? So it could be it. So that makes me wonder, okay, what is the antecedent to it?
Is it him or is it human? Or is it him or is it stripes?
So I would like to translate this, then by his stripes it was healed for us. And why do I want to translate it? In other words, what am I saying the meaning here by saying it was healed for us?
There's a connection between that and healing.
Bingo. Bingo. Look at this. This is amazing. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. And by His stripes it was healed for us. By His stripes our peace was healed for us. That's huge, isn't it? What he's trying to say is, by His stripes we were healed. What's the New American Standard say?
We are healed.
Yeah, we are healed. I mean, that's the literal, logical meaning that he's trying to get at. But that's not what he says. He says, by our stripes, it, I think referring to our peace, by His stripes, it was healed for us. So what is healed? You know, there's a big question that is always brought up by this verse. Is there healing in the atonement? And some people answer that, yes, there is healing in the atonement. I have problems with using the term atonement to begin with. But yeah, they say, yes, there's healing in the atonement, which means that if you have the faith, your body should be healed of sickness because you're saved. Amen. And yet everybody's not saved. There are other people who say, no, we're not going to say there's healing in the atonement because people die. Right? So you're not guaranteed physical healing because you're saved. Well, what's the answer?
Well, peace isn't necessarily a physical thing.
That's right. So it's not even directly saying that the person is healed, which I think is pretty significant. Yeah, could he be referring to what?
A more spiritual or
Our debt was paid, more was saying that it was, the healing was not a physical healing, but a spiritual healing.
Well, the answer to the question is there healing in the atonement? First of all, we're going to not use the word atonement because that's not a New Testament word. We're going to say, is there healing in redemption? And the answer to that question is yes. But then that begs another question to be asked, and that is, what do you mean by healing? Now, our peace is healed. Could it be spiritual peace?
Relationship.
Could it be soul peace? Could it be relational peace with God? Could it also be physical peace? And what was meant in the Old Testament when you saw peace? In the Old Testament, there's usually a physical aspect to peace, isn't there? So are we talking about peace in terms of our physical existence? And my answer to that is yes, we're talking about all of those. By His stripes, our peace is healed. All of those kinds of healing and all of those references of peace. The question is, when does it happen? When are we spiritually healed? When do we come to fullness of peace spiritually?
In God's spiritual.
Glorified when we're talking.
No, so before then. Conversion. The moment we're justified, we come to spiritual peace. When do we come to soul peace? Or, psyche, soul, psychological, right? When do we come to psychological peace? Mind, emotions, and will. Well, that's a process of sanctification. That's right. We're in the process of coming to peace in our soul right now. That's what sanctification is.
I guess I still think healed is being completed, and we're not completed.
Well, we're not. Is our redemption completed right now? No. When is our body going to be healed? Resurrection. Now you get the Easter connection.
Yeah, and more specifically, we're told that we're sins. We're slaves to the Spirit, but also we're continuing to be slaves to sin. We've never eliminated the sin nature.
Well, here's the thing. Our bodies, and I'm glad this is true because I'd be very disappointed if it were not. Our bodies have not yet been touched by redemption. Not directly. Indirectly, the Bible talks about if you walk with God, you'll be healthier. And I think that's true. So indirectly, redemption touches our bodies. But our bodies have not been directly touched by redemption yet. And they will not be until the resurrection. And so there is no guarantee for those who have been redeemed that there will be physical healing. Because those who have been redeemed also are being redeemed and also will be redeemed. This is something that you hear Dr. Rodmacher talk about a lot, and he's right on with it. Right? So, is there healing in redemption? Yes. Is there physical healing in redemption? Yes. Resurrection. Do we have it yet? Not really. But I have to hedge about that too, because I think it's possible for God to sort of bring resurrection healing ahead a little bit. Not in its entirety, but does God heal people physically, miraculously today?
Yes, if you send me $100
Yes.
a week,
Well, a lot of people try to make money off of that,
I'll give you the formula.
and that is a joke. But I do believe that God. I don't believe that there are typically operative faith healers today, but I believe that God absolutely does miraculously heal people today. And when He does that, He is taking a little slice of resurrection and bringing it into a person's life ahead of time. Now, does that mean they're immortal? No, I'm not saying that. They were healed, they're still going to die. Right? Just like Lazarus. Right? Lazarus got, a taste of, a picture of resurrection ahead of time, but he still was mortal when he went on to die.
But it's not resurrection, really, is it?
No.
That
Is being raised from the dead. Lazarus was not resurrected, he was raised from the dead. I'm just saying, just like this passage, hundreds of years before Christ, is a type or a messianic picture of Christ, if we're healed miraculously now, that is a type or a prefiguring of resurrection, and the prefiguring, the type, is always lesser than the real thing. So we're not becoming immortal, we're just having a miracle that is a lesser picture of the real miracle of resurrection that we will experience in our bodies later. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. So there really is a glimmer of resurrection. In the Old Testament, afterlife is a very undeveloped concept. But you do get a glimmer here of resurrection. And when you continue on in Isaiah 53, you see how even though the servant suffers, there's a prediction of his success. Well, what is that success? That success hinges on resurrection. And that's what I really tried to focus on Sunday. Resurrection Sunday yesterday. Yes?
And I look at the BDB and how it gives a few other maybe thoughts or words to give the concept of heal. It has darn, mend, repair, pacify, stitch together. And to me, I like the picture of those being added to the concept of healing, because
So apparently many times this word can be applied to a garment.
and
I think that's a biblical image of our body being a garment.
I like that idea, maybe a covering, or maybe, because even when you stitch something together, there's still a seam, there's still a remembrance. There's, even when you're healed, there's often a scar, that is not completely done away with.
Yeah, well, I want to be a little careful where I go with that in terms of resurrection. However,
But I'm just healing.
the scars of Christ remained on his resurrection body.
you'll see the holes in his hands.
But I think that's unusual. I think someone who is scarred in this life, literally, physically, probably will not carry those scars into eternity. Jesus did for obvious reasons, I think.
He'll continue to retain those scars.
I think so. And so,
At least let everybody see something.
verse 6 is a well-known verse, and it's interesting. Kulanu. What is that?
All.
Yeah, all, but with a one C, P.
All
All of us, we would say in English, all of us, like sheep. How do you deal with that next word? We know what it's going to be, right? But I want you to go through the process. Design Spark, help us. What word do we have there?
Is it the Ta'a or the...
Well, the tav is probably going to be a performative. Okay? comets under the Tav and a Hirik Yod in the middle of it, I'm thinking Hifil.
Iniquity?
That hit bill 1 CP.
Mm-hmm. But what's it from? Does Einspark give us a clue what it's from?
Is it iniquity again?
Naive, maybe?
No. Alright, I'll try to concentrate on what I'm doing here. So we're not getting any help from Einspark, huh? No, I don't even have that. You don't find a word that starts with iron?
Einspark.
Einspark.
Well, there's
Iniquity is the only one.
iniquity.
In 6?
Yeah.
Well, the new is the suffix. The dogish is on the tay.
Well, that word is actually almost toward the end of the verse. All right, the $64,000 question. You can find the word. Look in your dictionary.
What do you want?
Can I cheat?
With what?
Can strawberries?
Man, it's good. Don't cheat quite yet. Let's hang on a minute. Don't cheat quite yet. Let's see if we can. We may be reduced to that, but let's just see what we can do.
Pleasant, like
What if there's a noon in there if it's really supposed to
That's
be?
where and BDB would put you right around 653 if it was a new.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't take it. The iron wouldn't take a dogish, would it? Okay,
My kingdom for a parsing guide.
this is kind of a hard one.
That one that drops out to Yod sometimes, but Yod, and Yod.
Maybe an olive. Olive iron together.
Okay, well, you're not going to believe this. My initial impression was all wrong, and you can believe that, but you're not going to believe what it ends up being. Because it's easy to be led to believe that the Tav is a performative, and the Hirik Yod is telling you Hifil, and you have an A-class vowel under performative, and all that happy stuff. It's not imperfect. It's not Hitfield. Which means what?
Is Einspar right in where it says air?
So what word?
Tav,
Ayin, Hay. That's right. That's right. So what is it? Tav, Ayin, Hay. So in Holiday, it's on page 393.
Right here.
So it is transgression of some for another.
Well,
70.
Are you on holiday or the business trip?
it means to wander off or go astray or even stagger, be confused. Which is kind of interesting. So what would a sheep do?
Go astray.
I mean, yeah, what would be the problem that you always have with your sheep? They're always wandering off, right?
So what page did you say it was on?
Holiday 393. A. So, all of us, like sheep, wander off.
Drunk sheep, apparently, looking at the other uses of this word.
Yeah. Which, of course, would be root error, wouldn't it? Because really, sheep aren't going to stagger. That's not the issue we have here. We have an issue with them wandering off. Ish, a man, la dar ko. What is that?
That's Derek.
That's right. So to what? His way. Now paninu.
Italian standard.
Sounds like that, doesn't it? What kind of help do we get from Einspar?
Turn.
Huh? Pana, to turn. All right. So a man to his own way, and we're not going to really leave that translated a man. We're going to say each to his own way, we turn. Do you notice that? So that you're going to make something of that grammar there. Each one to his own way, we turn. So everybody's included in that. It's plural, but each one of us by ourselves turn to our own way. And again, notice the parallel. Turn to our own way is parallel with wandering. Right. So a sheep goes its own way. It's wandering. Doesn't go where the shepherd wants it to go. All right. And just to finish off the verse. Va'ad 9 and Yahweh Hifgiyah. Now I'm quite sure that's going to have to be Hitfield. From Pagah, what does Einspar give us?
Meat.
Okay, it's meat. I believe here it's in the sense of even meat in the sense of attacking. Okay, so the Lord caused to attack or I think the English probably gives fall, but it's to meet in that kind of a sense. Does Einspar give this? Einspar says meet.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can get a better translation of this. We'll have to look up Pagah since we're going to all this effort anyway. Oops. To encounter, to meet, to fall in with, to reach, to fall upon or attack, molest, even assail, attack, put pressure on, urge strongly on someone. Hitfield, to let something strike. So that's pretty good. So Yahweh let it strike him. What did he let him strike? And the 8 is giving us our definite direct object, right? So, and Yahweh let strike him the avon, iniquity of us all, or of all of us. Right? So, Yahweh let strike him the iniquity of us all. And that's really a restatement of the chastisement of our peace is upon him. Right? In different ways.
Bow again. Bow.
How did you translate that?
Well, that's bait, the preposition, and 3 ms suffix. Well, let fall to him, or it's probably idiomatic with that verb, fall. We would say it fall upon him or let strike him. It's interesting, in the beginning of Isaiah 53, there's a reference of a plant. He grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of dry ground, had no form or stately appearance that we might be drawn to him. That whole thing, I think, is in the context of a plant, right? Like a tree has a stately form. So he's kind of a gnarled, withered tree. And then we have the reference to sheep. So we have all kinds of really agrarian references here in this. But it's really quite a fascinating chapter, isn't it? Right? If you see the beauty of Hebrew poetry, I mean, you read it in English, yeah, you can enjoy it. You get some of the beauty, and it's great. But again, I think it's such an apt illustration. It's like reading it. It's like watching television in black and white when you read it in English, right? You get the picture. It's an accurate picture. It's just not in color. When you read poetry in Hebrew, man, it turns color, doesn't it? It's just really awesome. So you can read the chastening of our well-being was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed, and that's beautiful, right? But when you read the chastening of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes it is healed for us. That's not as good in English, is it? But the concepts in that are incredible. And it really comes alive and turns color. We certainly wouldn't watch television in black and white anymore, would we? I don't know about you, but I grew up in my family with a black and white television.
Black and white UHF. I have.
Love UHF. Would never, wouldn't be caught dead watching television in black and white. Just isn't good enough.
Well, Lawrence of Arabia.
I'm not saying you shouldn't read your Bible in English, you should, but you do get it in color here, which is really awesome. All right, so now, when you can do this without trouble, I'm going to the reasons why, but my wife took my truck, and, on like the second time in the last year, I forgot my computer in my truck overnight, and the first time in a year, she took my truck to work. So I was without my computer last week. Which I use, to do my Hebrew work a lot, so that really speeds it up. So I was forced to do Hebrew the old-fashioned way in this passage, like you guys are. And so I pored over this literally for hours, sitting out on my back deck with the pollen falling on my books, just poring over this. And I really appreciated the fact that I had to do it the old-fashioned way, because it slowed me down even more. And I'm looking, I went in and had to dig out BDB. I had BDB open and Holiday and Einspar and everybody just going, and doing this stuff. And
you use Parson,
well, fortunately I didn't need it. But, I in an afternoon I got through it. It could have taken me 4 days to get through it. I never could have done it for my sermon, right? But I could get through it in an afternoon. And there's something about taking several hours to read 12 verses. Just that in itself. If something forces you to take 4 hours to read 12 verses, there's something cool about that. Something happens when you go that slow, right? It does. And it's very nifty. So you really get the picture. So you might be saying, it's taking me forever to do a verse and it's really slow. I don't know if you've seen it already, but there come to be awesome benefits of being forced to go that slow. If you think I would have been disciplined enough to read it in English, to spend 4 hours on an afternoon reading Isaiah 53 in English, I know I could have got through it more than once. But if you think I'd have been disciplined to spend 4 hours reading Isaiah 53 in an afternoon for a sermon in English, you're nuts. I never would have been able to do it. But when it slowed me down enough, it's an awesome thing. And as I told my church Sunday, I never get more thankful that I can read the Bible in the original language than when I'm reading Hebrew poetry. Because obviously poetry is a work of art. And when you look at a work of art in black and white, you can appreciate it. But when you see it in color, it just lives. It's just really awesome. So that's what you're headed for, right? And you can see yourself getting there, right? You may not be to the point now where you're fast enough to make it feasible to use in ministry, but if you work at it, you can get there. especially with computer helps. But you know what? I hope I'm disciplined enough to put away my computer, and I'm doing that more now. You know, even though I have my computer in front of me, I'm pulling out the books. I'm not going to it's parsing it for me as quick now. You know, because there just was a lot of value in searching for it in BDB and finding it and just taking the time to do that. You know what I mean? In our fast-paced world, when do we do that? You know, fast-paced ministry life, when you sit for 4 hours and do nothing but look at the text you're preaching on. I mean, I'm not taking notes. I'm not thinking of sermon outline, nothing for 4 hours. I'm doing nothing but reading the text I'm preaching from on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or whatever it was. Right? So, you know, it's a great thing. It's a lot of work we're doing here, but it's a great thing to be able to use it. All right. Grammar, page 307. Okay. In this chapter, we will study the second of the derived stems, the PL. What's the non-derived stem? Cal. What's the first derived stem we studied? Nipple. Right? Now we have PL. Again, remember the name PL because it's giving you a clue to the vowel patterns in the perfect. Right? So, as in your study of the Nifal stem, remember Nifal gives you a clue to the vowel patterns in the perfect. Right? Nifal. Nipal. Right? And then we're using katal as our paradigm verb because it's a strong verb. For some reason, these names come from a weak verb, pei, ayin, lamed. So, PL. Now, in English, we're getting two vowels together, but there's an ayin in there in Hebrew, right? That we're not hearing. PL. Nifal. There's an ayin in there. It's nifal. So, noon with the hirik under it. Pei without a doggy, so you get an F sound, right? Shirik under it. Shirik. Shava under it, right? Ayin with the A-class vowel under it, and lama. Nifal. Nipal. Right? You see where I'm going with that? So PL, same thing. If I'm using katal, it's going to be kiteo, PAL. Right? So the Nipal said the paradigm memorization is not required. So we don't have to memorize the whole paradigm, which we dance in the street over there. Rather, you'll study certain diagnostic points of spelling that are unique to the PL stem. The most important diagnostic features include vocal shava under all imperfect and participle performatives and prefixes, patak under the first root consonant of every conjugation except the perfect, and a dagesh forte in the second root consonant of every form. Okay. Now, what's the meaning of the PL stem? In our textbook, we're still getting what you might call the old paradigm or the old way of looking at Hebrew stems. There is a new way. But it's very new, and so people aren't rushing yet to embrace it on the beginning level. As we are learning, the cal is just your simple meaning, right? Nifal is the past tense of the simple meaning. That's all cool. Now we're going to learn that PL is an intensification of the simple meaning, right? Well, the new... let me go one step further. PL is an intensification of the simple meaning. Hiphil takes the simple meaning and makes it causative. Alright? So, I break, I was broken, nifal. PL, I caused to break. No, I'm sorry. PL, I shattered, intensified. Right? Hiphil, I caused to break. Alright? Well, the new way of looking at it says, no, it's not quite like that. The PL is an intensive. The PL is causing a state of being, which sometimes isn't all that far off from the intensification thing, right? And the hifil is causing an action, right? So it's break, broken, to be broken, and PL caused to be in a state of brokenness, right? But if you're in a state of brokenness, you're shattered. But it is different, though, right? To cause to be in a state of brokenness, and hifil to cause to break, right? So that's the new way of looking at the standards. But we're going to stick with what they're saying here because that needs to be tested and you know, before we change our whole understanding of the Hebrew stems, we need to live with that for a while, right? But bear that in mind.
Well, I was trying to think how you would intensify kill our paradigm.
Well, slaughter.
Does that work for you?
Murder and dismember.
Well, I mean, the end result may not be any worse, but the process could be more gruesome.
Sherman has a word, Uber. Uber kills somebody.
But if it's in the PL, it might be, to put someone in a state of death. Or if it's hifil, it might be to cause someone to kill somebody else. All right, but the meaning of the PL, intensive, right? And he gives the example of the break, the difference between broke or smashed or shattered. But he also gives you a factative use of the PL, which takes an intransitive verb in the Cal and makes it transitive. So in the Cal, Kadash is to be holy. And that's stative, so that's kind of interesting, right? Now, Kadash means to sanctify. And in my mind, I'm trying to think, okay, well, what about Kadash? To cause to be in a state of holiness. That pretty much means sanctify, right? Avad, to perish. Ivad. I can't tell sometimes when I'm looking at a pop rock or it's Ivad, to destroy. To cause to be in a state of having perished or something like that, right? And then Tameh, to be unclean. Timeh, to defile. So to be unclean doesn't take a direct object, in other words. To defile does take a direct object, to defile something, right? So, in other words, PL can take a Cal, intransitive verb, and in PL it can be transitive, take a direct object. A denominative, you can take a noun, davar, word, and put it in the PL, which we know the word to speak is in the PL. Deber means to speak, and so on. Kohen, a priest, Kehen, to serve as priest, Apar, dust, Ipar, to throw dirt. To cause something to be in a state of dustedness or dustiness. All right, and then there's the iterative, and it makes sense again here. The Cal, halak, to walk, halak, to pace around, to walk around. Or what if it means to cause someone to be in a state of walking? Right? But iterative, what is iterative? You remember from Greek what iterative means? The word iterative means it happens, it happens over and over. It's repetitive, right? If I said I eat chili, what does that mean? Well, that means on a lot of occasions down through time I go back and eat chili again. It doesn't mean that I'm constantly eating chili, but it means that on occasion I eat chili. Yes.
It would reiterate be a redundancy.
Yeah. I guess it would be. Okay. That's funny. I want to reiterate it. Well, that would be, and it's a redundancy for emphasis, probably. Because if you iterate something, that means you repeat it, I would seem.
I want to do it over and
So
over.
if I reiterate it, that's, I've iterated this before, and I'm going to reiterate it.
So let me iterate something to you. That would be telling someone for the first time.
No, I would say if you're iterating, that would imply maybe that you're saying this regularly.
Get a dictionary.
I was thinking today, I wonder what it means to dissipate. Because I can anticipate.
Also dissipate.
I can also dissipate.
There would be two different types of dissipate.
Participate.
The anticipate is C, then dissipate would be double S. So dissipate and dissipate.
They might be different ways. See, we got a Latin guy over here, don't we? So this is good. You had to deal with these Latin words, haven't you?
Pro bono, pro se.
Pro bono.
Well,
Yeah. And what's the one? Habeas corpus. I still don't know what that means, but I never took Latin.
It would be, habeas corpus, something in the body. I forget that.
Corpus, that would make sense. Anyway, all right, PL. Those are the uses of the PL. So now we're looking at patterns, right? Fairly simple. In the cow, you look at katal in the cow. PL is kiteo. And notice the vowel points are following the very name PL, at least in the 3MS. Now when I start adding endings, stuff happens to my vowel points, just as it does in the cow, right? So what are the diagnostic features? We see it in the box. Here we go. Heuric under the first root letter and a dogish in the middle root letter. Now I run into problems, that's fine on strong verbs, but when I get into weak verbs, I might have no dogish in the middle root letter, because if it's a guttural or a resh, then I'm not going to be able to put a dogish in it, right? Aleph, ayin, resh, consonants like that. Alright, so pay attention then to the perfect diagnostic. The imperfect diagnostic, you see on the bottom of the next page, Shiva under the performative, and Patak under the first root letter, and Dogish in the middle root. You always have a Dogish in the middle root if it can take a Dogish, right? Now, what was a cow? What was the vowel patterns for a cow?
Oh, that's a Patak. What are you talking about?
Vowel patterns for the cow imperfect.
Oh, cow.
Yeah.
Oh, was part of it. Yeah. Well, remember what was our? Well, there was a Shiva, but where was the Shiva?
The first one.
Under the first root letter of Shiva, but what was under the performative?
Here, Shiva.
Period. Yiktol, tiktol. So Shiva, first root letter, and Holum, between the second and third, right? Going with the second consonant, right? What was the pattern for the nifal? Now the plot thickens.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. The performative was
Same thing as what?
it was the same thing as the imperfect. The perfect difference is in the perfect they had the nifal, the noon, but in the imperfect you dropped it and gave it a dogish.
Okay, the noon assimilates into, so in the nifal, the first root letter is going to have a dogish, right? Because that's the noon assimilating. Huh? No? Well, yeah, but that's not diagnostic.
Oh,
The
okay.
imperfect in the nifal.
Nifal,
Always says
imperfect.
comments under the first root letter.
There you go. Do you get that? Comets under the first root letter, and the first root letter is also going to have a dogish for the nifal assimilating if it can take it. Right? The point is, and the reason I'm bringing this up, of course, is the point is we're learning these things so that we can distinguish one from the other. Right? Because we're going to look at a word and go, what is that? Does it have the vowel pointing that a nifal would have? Or does it have the vowel pointing that a PL would have, or a cow would have, or a hippial down the road, or whatever, right? So, in both of the nifal and the PL, there's an A-class vowel under the first root letter, but in the nifal, it's a comet, and in the PL, it's a patak. Okay? What is the vowel that you expect in the nifal under the performative?
Heuric?
Well, here's and let me show you this so that you can use this. We've seen it before on your own, right? I've dog-eared my page. You dog-ear your page. Page number, even dog-ear doesn't help sometimes. Page number 416. So I asked you the question, the nifal, what's the vowel under the performative for the nifal imperfect? Hirig. Typically, right? What's the vowel for the PL? Shabbat. So we have a, what you're going to look for with the nifal, dogish in the first root letter and a comments. Right? What you're going to look for in the PL is a dogish in the middle root letter and a potok under the first root letter. See that? Now you can see where we're going along the line, right? The pual is going to be fairly easy to recognize because you've got that kibbutz going on in there, right? The right? The pual is just the passive of a PL, right? Now when we get to the hifil, that's somewhat easy to recognize because you end up with a hirik yod in the middle of a lot of your forms. But now I got my patak or my A-class vowel under the performative and not under the first root letter. See that shift right there? Bam. See what's happening? See where we're going? We almost cover these chapters all at once right here by looking. See? Now in the hafel, I get my O-class vowel or my kibbutz under the performative. See? So PL pual, I'm looking under the first root letter. Hifil hafel, I'm looking under the performative. Hitpael is a piece of cake because you end up with an extra tav as a performative. So instead of being in the imperfect, instead of being hit, it's yet, tit for tat, right? Now, that's that top page. You got to look at the bottom page. Okay, the imperative, as always, the imperative is formed by just taking the second person imperfect forms and taking the performative off. So again, first root letter, I'm having a patak in the first root letter and dogish in the middle root letter. All right? Infinitive construct. How's the infinitive construct formed? Infinitive construct is just like the 2ms or first imperative. That's the case in the cow. That's the case in the nifal. See that? And that's the case in the PO. So again, it's just my 2ms imperfect form, or whatever imperfect form you want to use at that point, with the performative taken off. As long as it's a imperfect form without an ending, that'll work, right? Because then my other vowel points don't change. Follow that? So, if I keep in mind that for nifal, I've got the assimilating noon, and I don't have to concentrate that much on the perfect because nifal, right, is giving me a clue to how the perfect's going to look. PL is giving me a clue to how the perfect's going to look. Hifil is giving me Hifil is going to have a hey on the front of it and a hirik yod, that kind of thing, right? Or just a hirik maybe. But the hey on the front of a perfect gives me a huge clue that I'm in the hifil, hafil kind of world, right? So the perfect tense is really not that difficult. For the imperfect, I also have to remember. Comments under the first root letter, nifal. Now I also got my dogish thing to throw in there, right? Dogish in the first, assimilated noon. Patak under the first root letter, PL. And I can also throw my dogish in the second root letter, which is the little PL, pual sort of thing, right? And for the other, well, I'm going to mix you up with that, but hifil is going to be, you got your patak under your performative instead of your. So if you just notice those shifts in the vowel points, it's really not that hard. You get in some weak verbs, funny things happen, but most of the weak verbs in the PL are pretty consistent anyway. Right. Infinitive absolute is formed in a couple of different ways in the PL as well as in the nifil. You would expect the infinitive absolute to be, it could be the same as the infinitive construct, but it could be katol. But look how the cow is formed. Katol. The nifal is strange because it's got the noon or the hey with the assimilated noon in the infinitive absolute. The PL just gives me the katol with that dogish in the middle root again. So I'm still staying consistent in my PL with a patak under the first root letter, right? See? So that's key to know, key to learn. And my participles, again, same thing. I have got a patak under the first root letter every time in a PL participle. You see that? How am I going to know it's a participle? Mame on the front of it. Now remember, the cal participle does not have a mame. The nifal participle has a noon. Right? See it right down there at the very bottom of the page? All the rest of the participles have a main prefix. Or if a hit file, it has a mit prefix, right? See that? But again, the same thing is holding true with the imperfect. In the PL, patak under the first root letter. Right? In the pual, I'm going to get a kibbutz under the first root letter. In hifel, I'm going to get the patak under the performative, the main performative. See, it's pretty consistent. Right? So it takes a while, right? I mean, you look at it and you go, oh, that's pretty easy. It takes a while to be able to, work with these things, assimilate these things. You look at a word. That's why you can see why vocabulary is critical again, right? Because if you can't pick out the vocabulary word, words, and we saw how I was struggling with that one word that starts with a tav, right? Is that a performative? Well, most of the time it is. Not in that case, though. What, a main, is that going to be a participle marker? Most of the time it is. But if the vocabulary word happens to start with a main, it's not going to be. So, you get to look for these markers, and once you determine it could be a participle, where's the A vowel, and what A vowel is it, If it's under the first root letter, PL, if it's under the main performative, ifil. If I have a kibbutz, I know I've got a U kind of thing going on. So, you see how I'm saying it just takes a while to get used to all these things and working them in, right? Questions about that? We're getting toward the end of the grammar, aren't we? All right. So we pretty much understand the formation of the PL. Good vocabulary stuff. Read the chapter. Really good stuff on the devotional thing at the end of the chapter there. That's great stuff. Also read the advanced information, the Polel stand. We ran into a Polel in our reading of Isaiah, right? So sometimes if you look in your dictionary, you're going to see some stems that you never heard of. Don't worry about it. It's just stuff happening, right? At the end of the chapter on strong verbs, there's something interesting to look at, and it is page 316, the advanced information, loss of the doggish forte. Now make sure you take a look at that. There are various reasons why you can lose a doggish forte, and it outlines it in that paragraph at the bottom of that page. And then there's even a conjunctive doggish forte, as you can read about right there. Okay. I mean, there's really no more point in me going over that, because it's just a matter of reading it and looking at it. Realizing that you don't want to be overwhelmed by doggish fortes necessarily. And there are other reasons for them disappearing. All right, so any questions on the grammar part of it? Cool. It's getting a little easier on the grammar stuff, isn't it? Yeah. Remember how we were, I thought we were drowning in the beginning there? Remember that? But now we've got our little straw in our mouth and we're sucking wind. All right, so let's take a break.